Gender and power in nursing. Gender is a socially constructed concept which places males and females on opposite sides of a spectrum. Femininity is often associated with attributes such as submissiveness, helplessness, tenderness, and nurturing, while masculinity is associated with strength, ambition, aggression, and logic. These socially constructed gender ideologies are engraved in us from birth and are constantly being reinforced through cultural norms and society's expectations of the gender roles. Power is the value and worth, the capacity to direct or influence the behavior of others and course of events. The issue is that the value that is attributed to each gender in our society is not neutral. As a society, there is more value placed on the male attributes than female, ultimately giving more power to men than women. So what is the issue? The main issue is that the female gender has been linked to the profession of nursing, and since traditionally females are seen as powerless and submissive compared to men, this is perpetuated into the profession of nursing.
So what is the historical influence? The issue is largely rooted in the socially constructed hierarchy of medicine, with doctors being regarded as superior over nurses, giving the profession of nursing less power in the field of healthcare. To add to this, historically, doctors were predominantly male, while nurses were female, further perpetuating the inequality of women. In the 1960s, nursing was seen as a profession that embodied female virtues, where the role of nursing was focused around care and nurturance. Nightingale nurses were trained to observe gentleness and quietness. To act professional was to refrain from questioning physicians' judgment and obediently carrying out their order. Historically, nursing has been described as a women's mission and a service of womanly duty and conscience. Nursing has been equated with the socially constructed concept of femininity and the female virtues, caring, nurturance, and altruism, which is commonly devalued. Occupations dominated by men were highly regarded and better rewarded over female occupations. In the past, males were associated with the technical skills, while females were linked to interpersonal skills. Today in society, despite the nursing role becoming a more technical occupation, the nursing profession is still struggling to gain value and recognition. This notion has been ingrained into the nursing profession, where nurses today still feel trapped in their status as subordinates to doctors.
The current issue in gender inequality is that it's female dominated, there are differences in wages, males are treated differently, and there's questioning doctors' orders. This inequality that persists between men and women continues to exist within society. Specifically in the workforce, there is a gender division of labor seen in the types of jobs that are considered as women's work, including nursing, which continues to be female-dominated. As seen in the chart on the left, 94% of nurses are female in Canada. Jobs dominated by men are better rewarded than those dominated by women. This is a result of the continued patriarchal society's tendency to value technical skill over interpersonal skill. Women are less likely to be promoted to higher positions or to be paid the same wage as men do. This wage gap continues to exist in Canada, with women making 72% the salary of men. This workplace inequality is carried into nursing, as a census taken in 2013 showed that male nurses earn approximately $70,000, while female nurses earned $60,000. Although nursing is a female-dominated profession, there has been an increase in male nurses. As an activity, can you guess these professions? Which one's a nurse?
My name is Doris, and I'm an ICU nurse at Northwark General Hospital in our medical surgical ICU.
I work up in northern Manitoba at Thompson General Hospital Emergency Department. We're the regional emergency department for all of northern Manitoba, and then we get some mental health patients from Iqaluit.
I'm Oscar. I'm a neurotrauma ICU nurse.
My name is Lynn, and I'm a pharmacist.
This is Ladween Grayfa. She's a nursing assistant. This is Sue Grayfa. She's an NP.
This is Michael, and he's a pharmacist.
As the number of males entering the field of nursing is increasing, this brings new challenges to the nursing profession for both men and women in nursing. For men, they are entering into a profession which has been dominated by women, and a job which has been gendered and labeled as women's work, which can lead to challenges for male nurses. For example, with patients, there is sometimes an immediate refusal of care based on their gender. Some males are treated differently by their colleagues compared to female nurses.
Do you think you get treated differently because you're a male nurse by your colleagues?
Yeah, probably so. I think the one thing is that that I feel at work is that we are kind of not, we're treated differently in terms that they don't really get too aggressive with us. Almost they almost kind of leave us alone, let us do our own thing.
Yeah.
And they don't really ever kind of quote unquote bully you.
Mm-hmm.
That's just my kind
So
of.
they bully the girls?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh.
I believe that, even from my old job and new job, because I moved to the neurotrauma, I find the same experience. I didn't really have that much of a hard time compared to others. Like the female ones,
Yeah.
because I have guy friends there too, and I think they treat us differently. They almost kind of leaving us alone.
Like they don't nitpick and
Yeah.
tell you, oh, you did something wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
They
I
just
think
let you do your thing.
that's my experience. I'm not sure if other male nurses feel that same way.
Yeah, maybe you're just doing really good.
Maybe.
Better
I
than
don't know.
them.
But they never really bother me about things,
Yeah.
like the educator or the manager. They don't really come up to me to talk about a lot of things. They don't really pressure me. Whereas I know other people, they do it to them. So I'm not sure if it's to do with gender
Right.
or any other things.
Yeah,
But
just
that's my experience. Yeah, I can only say it from two different jobs, and they both have been the same.
Male nurses are also consistently recruited and expected to do the heavy lifting in nursing, to deal with aggressive patients, and to be the first to respond to code whites.
Has your gender ever impacted your role as a nurse?
I suppose sometimes it's like when, say, patient's very violent or patient's very heavy, they always kind of give it to the guy. Kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's one thing about it. That
Okay.
a very violent person that is hitting or scratching is oh, give it to the guy. But it's I don't mean
I'm a person
fighting
too.
skills. Yeah.
Yeah.
Finally, there are instances when patients will assume they are the doctor, only further perpetuating the idea that men can only hold positions with socially perceived hierarchical power.
But that's why it's so important just from, and they push this, is just from the get-go. As soon as you walk in the room, you say, hi, I'm Joe, I'm going to be your nurse. Done. Right? Being in an emergency department, it's interesting because, you get somebody coming in, and on nights we only have one doc. Nurses we can get IVs started, we can, start fluids and whatnot within reason. So if you have a septic patient who's not well and their blood pressure is low and you can't find the doc, you'll start, some fluid resuscitation. And then because you're kind of doing these things and kind of taking a leading role, folks will assume you're the doctor and then, start asking you questions and be like, what are you going to do and this, that, and everything else. And then there's always that moment where you're like, whoa. Actually, no, I'm the nurse. It's interesting because I take a lot of pride in being a nurse, and somebody assumes I'm a doctor because I'm a male. That's a great opportunity to advocate for your peers by saying, no, I'm a nurse and I'm proud of it and I have a different role on this healthcare team. And I think it's an opportunity to, as best you can, try to be a feminist and and advocate and support those women with you, and say no, it's got there's other nurses on this crew who are way smarter than me. Hey, they're also women.
So we asked some nurses whether or not they would question a doctor's order, and it's interesting to see the change in power over time.
This young man had a very bad cut. Oh, please. And I had to, because we have a tray with instruments, and everything for cleaning the wound and so on. And she didn't clean the wound. And that young man came back with a bad infection. And that's when I told the nurse that was in charge of the floor, I said, she never cleaned the wound. But it wasn't up to me to tell her, I'm sorry, but you've got to clean the wound.
Why couldn't you tell her?
You didn't do those things in those days. She was a doctor, okay, and I was a nursing assistant.
Probably not too much. This was I graduated in '89, so it was still a while ago. So I think it was this sort of guiding kind of feeling. That was actually the culture. That you didn't have a conflict with the doctor, you sort of suggested, so it's sort of like their idea, that sort of, which when you think about it, is sort of a gendered concept, where you don't want to get in somebody's face or their feelings, you just want to sort of gently guide them along to what you know is the right answer.
When we asked Joe, he explained how he feels like the doctors on his floor in the hospital respond to him differently compared to his female colleagues. He went on to say that doctors seem to be defensive when female nurses question their orders, while they have more of a conversation with Joe when he questions their orders.
Nursing Monique's body of knowledge forms the basis for standards in nursing, practice related to gender and power in nursing. The body of knowledge includes both theoretical and practical knowledge, which is acquired through academics and in practice. Nursing knowledge has increased dramatically over the last decades, which has led to an increased scope of practice for nurses. Historically, as previously mentioned, nurses were essentially doctors' handmaidens, limited to following orders without question, suppressed by the hierarchy of male dominance. Now, nurses have gained power in the workplace by increasing their body of knowledge, and therefore widening their scope of practice. Sue explains why she thinks the scope of practice has increased.
Nurses became more and more responsible for clients of higher acuity, and more clients of higher acuity, and this put pressure on nursing as a profession to be very knowledgeable and have that nursing knowledge and scientific knowledge behind them to be able to do that. And then, of course, technology changes. So as technology changes, nurses had to be responsible for that as well. New diagnostic tests, procedures, as technology changed and acuity changed and people were sicker. In hospital, people were sicker. And nurses had to do more. And so it just put, nurses have always responded to what is required of them, and this was huge, I think, in terms of you better be smart, and you better know your stuff, and you better understand the science, and you better be able to look at the whole client, decide what's going on. So.
The C&O legislation and regulation, RIPA, Scope of Practice and Controlled Acts model, is a key and influential document that shapes gender and power in nursing. The scope of practice allows RNs and RPNs to perform 4 controlled acts. This means that nurses may carry out a procedure in the absence of a specific order or medical directive from a physician. This gives nurses more freedom, autonomy, and ultimately power in the workplace. The NP role is even broader than the RN and RPN scope, and was recently expanded even more as an NP is able to communicate a diagnosis, prescribe a medication, and order tests. Also, within the last year, NPs are now able to prescribe narcotics. With these recent developments in our nursing history, the nursing knowledge has led to advancement in regards to gender and power in the profession and our society today. Nursing as a profession has a unique body of knowledge that is universal for all nurses practicing in Ontario, which is then translated into the College of Nurses of Ontario's practice standard and guidelines. These standard and guidelines help to form the issues and solutions that guide our practice. For example, the CNO Standard of Ethics and Therapeutic Nurse-Client Relationship inform that our practice as nurses is to be caring and empathetic in the workplace. As stated earlier, a caring and empathetic person would commonly be synonymous to words such as tenderness, nurturance, and altruistic. Therefore, a nurse that is told to be caring and empathetic plays into societal views of what females ought to be, powerless, thus perpetuating the notion that a nurse who is caring must be female, therefore in no position of power. This leads our male counterparts to be often neglected by societal members, as a male nurse is thought to be by society to not be caring or empathetic in nature.
Overall, the CNO standard and guidelines does a great job in neutralizing the gender and power imbalance many have today. In the CNO standards of professional standards, they talk about nurses being accountable, a leader, and applying their knowledge in the workplace. That does not only mean that nurses are accountable for the job and care they provide for their client, but it relates to advocating on behalf of clients to promote the client's choice in regards to their plan of care. It could also mean that for a nonverbal or vulnerable client, that it is our responsibility to share the nursing knowledge and expertise with others to ensure our clients have a voice when discussing with the care plan. These nurses, in doing so, demonstrate leadership, accountability, and knowledge application when advocating for their clients in front of other healthcare members. This ultimately leads to both male and female nurses to have a professional standard and guideline that supports them to have more power in the workplace, especially for female nurses, seeing as female nurses have more of an invisible barrier blocking them from gaining the power that is necessary in the workplace.
How does nursing theory inform the issue? Nursing theories in the workplace are extremely beneficial because they serve as a guide to nursing practice. However, in some ways, nursing theories can also have a detrimental impact in regards to gender and power. Nursing theory can sustain the ideology that nursing is meant to be a female-dominated profession. The first issue is that we have a dominant nursing theory related solely to caring, the Jean Watson theory of human caring, and Madeline's transcultural nursing. Seeing as caring is often regarded as a female virtue, and if being female is linked to a lesser degree of power, this may portray that the theory guiding the nursing profession is not a very powerful one. Controversially, the theories are highlighting the importance of caring. That is a strong virtue that is essential and needs to be integrated into our nursing profession and practice.
So how do the various nursing organizations discussed in this course impact gender and power in nursing? The Ontario Nurses Association, or ONA, is the voice for nurses that negotiate nurse wages, benefits, and workloads on our behalf through their collective agreement with employers. ONA advocates for workplace safety, violence against women, and eliminating the gender wage gap in Ontario. They have also made submissions to the government regarding the need for better access to unionization and bargaining power. Although nursing as a profession is associated with the female gender, thus perceived as having a lack of power, ONA seeks to give the nursing profession power and eliminate any inequalities between the genders.
The Registered Nurses Association of Ontario help nurses to move forward in the profession by highlighting the importance of nurses as leaders in healthcare through policy reform and political action. The RNAO fights for fair compensation for NPs and RNs, focusing on the pay inequities in primary care organizations compared to colleagues in other sectors. In relation to gender and power, the RNAO works to maintain standards of care in nursing, which in turn enables nurses to develop therapeutic relationships with their patients regardless of the gender.
The College of Nurses of Ontario. As we have mentioned before, the CNO's role for setting standards in nursing and defining scope of practice has transformed the role of nurses in healthcare. The Controlled Acts defined in RHPA allow nurses the freedom to provide care based on their own medical judgment and not under the order of the physician. RNs and NPs have more control over their practice now more than ever, and their roles still continue to grow as additional acts and services are becoming incorporated into the scope of practice. By expanding the nurse's scope of practice, this gives nursing as a profession more power, thus addressing the issue of gender and nursing head-on.
Canadian Nurses Association and International Council of Nurses. CNA takes on a leadership role for advocating global health and gender equity in Canada and around the world. They partner with ICN to address how the power imbalances and limited access to resources. Both CNA and ICN are leaders in promoting the creation of nursing committees in these countries that advocate for and closely monitor gender and health issues. CNA advances the nursing leadership and profession by uniting nurses on a national scale. ICN seeks to have the nursing profession recognized and respected, which leads to great empowerment for nurses on a global scale.
So, how does power and gender in nursing impact our therapeutic and professional relationships between nurses and colleagues, nurses and patients, and the nurse-client relationship? First, there is an imbalance between nurses and our colleagues. As previously discussed, there is an existing power imbalance between the profession of nurses and doctors, with doctors holding more power. As seen in the video shown in class, Bitter Medicine, nurses would have to ask for the physician's permission for practically every decision regarding a patient before giving care to them. Not only was this inefficient in terms of patient care, but it undermined the nursing profession and highlighted the lack of power that nursing had. This inequality in power is a barrier to collaborative care and shared decision-making. Physicians as well have a tendency to view nurses as powerless and incompetent. This view of incompetence is emphasized especially for female nurses. The actions and behaviors of physicians, which are then projected onto the nurses working under them, can intimidate the nurse to a point where patient advocacy is jeopardized in fear of the physician's reaction. This would negatively affect therapeutic care, as the care provided would not be client-centered if a nurse is afraid to advocate for their patient. When asked about power and gender, Elizabeth Hewer, an RN, responded by saying, "Although doctors were still considered to be gods in comparison to nurses, the younger doctors were well aware of their dependence on the nursing staff to have a more accurate and current picture of the patient's health status. So our power as nurses lay with our observation and communication skills, which could then be incorporated into a care plan which met the medical problems of our patients."
The power imbalance between nurse and patient. The patient may view a nurse as incompetent, powerless, less knowledgeable by comparing them to a physician's role. This view again is further highlighted when the nurse is female due to existing gender stereotypes. The client's bias and stereotypes may negatively affect the development of the nurse-client relationship. A patient may not respect the nurse due to a nurse's inability to communicate a diagnosis or write a prescription. In opposition, the patient may view the nurse as having more power. This can be attributed to the body of knowledge that this profession holds, which may leave patients not feeling empowered enough to speak up about their own care. Minority groups may feel even less empowered based on socially constructed status for each group. For example, members of LGBTQ+ or patients of different religious views or races may feel less inclined to advocate for their health. As outlined by the CNO standards for a therapeutic nurse-client relationship, the components of the relationship include trust, respect, empathy, and professional intimacy. While a nurse of any gender can exhibit respect and empathy for any of their patients, it may prove to be especially difficult for male nurses to gain the trust of their patients. In addition, it may be difficult to be in a professionally intimate setting with a patient of the opposite gender if the nurse can sense a patient's discomfort about the situation.
When asked whether or not they are treated differently by their patients because they are a male nurse, they responded by saying,
"Patient ever refused your care because you were a male?"
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah. They just say, like, I prefer not to be a male. But sometimes it's most of the time we try to, it's their choice as a patient, but at the same time, sometimes it's not possible to do it because of, workload or
Of course.
other things going on. But if it's, we try not to force it if it's possible. But most of the time, it's just because I will be the only one that can take care of them. But like as a male, sometimes you feel uncomfortable when it starts off like that because sometimes. So you try to have like a female in the room with you when you're doing certain things, just to make sure like there's no funny thing going on. Basically.
Have you been refused care a lot? Like, have they?
No. You can sometimes tell who's gonna refuse care.
There's
Yeah,
types
certain
of people.
yeah, like certain backgrounds, like certain more traditional backgrounds, um, like more like people from like kind of like old school, like religion wise, and or like just where they're from. They're sort of not used to it, and I respect that, and I understand it's not comfortable.
I've had experiences where walking into the room to generally an older female patient, they've been, there's been some anxiety around the idea and, an initial refusal for me to provide kind of the more intimate care with, especially like a bed bath, for example, or, a Foley catheter starting. I think it has to do with, being in a female dominated profession, you're seen as a male first. I've never actually not ended up performing care. I haven't. I'm very proud of that because instead of just taking it, it's like sure, on the one hand, they want me to do less work, awesome, but then you could sit down with them and actually explain. I'm here as a professional. I'm here as a nurse, and also explain the idea of autonomy and their own independence as a patient, and that you're only going to be helping them with stuff they can't do otherwise. But when you sit down and don't feed off of that emotion or that anxiety that they have and validate it, acknowledge it, and then present yourself as a professional and explain the boundaries that you're going to set. I haven't had that not work yet.
We then asked Ledwine, during your recent stay at the hospital, did it bother you having a male nurse?
I felt very good about it. Like I told him, I said, you're the nurse, I'm the patient. You do what you have got to do. Mm-hmm. You just forget it. I'm very easy about that. By the way, Napoleon was his name. He was a sweetheart.
In conclusion, the topic of gender and power is still a prominent issue in our society today. The battles that both male and female nurses have fought for in the workplace has made significant advancement, but there is still more work to be done. That's up to us, the future generation of nurses, to make the change. We'll leave you with some questions for some reflection.